When I started writing this review, I searched ReefBot Lab on YouTube to see what other videos were out there. I'd already seen some of them myself, of course, but I hadn't appreciated just how many videos there were already. I stopped counting at 15, excluding shorts, so while my original plan was to do a normal video, I just don't think there's any point in me going over the same things everybody else has done. So instead I'm going to try to give you a different perspective, and I'm going to tell you all of the things I didn't like about it. Then at the end I'll tell you if I still think it's a good bit of kit despite its quirks, and I'll tell you who I think it's for and who it's not for. Before I get into that though, there is of course the usual disclosure. Reef Kinetics sent me the ReefBot Lab for free, and I get to keep it after I made the review. I'm of course free to say whatever I want, both good and bad, and Reef Kinetics don't get to see this video before you do, nor do they get any input into the content. I'm going to kick things off then with the form factor. I think most people will agree that the gloss black acrylic and diffused LED bar at the top look pretty cool, but we need to address the elephant in the room. No, seriously, this thing is so big, it's like having a baby elephant in your room. Space is at a premium in any tank, and I feel like the size alone will restrict the ReefBot to being a niche product. And it won't even fit in the cabinet of my 6-foot tank, so I've had to install it next to the tank. The build quality is also not on a par with the main brands in the hobby. I had a couple of bolts pop off when I was unscrewing the lid, and one of the panel latches came off when it slipped onto the floor from a height of about 2 inches. There are also lots of exposed wires and circuit boards, and large parts of the ReefBot, including the main central column, are 3D printed, all of which gives it a little bit of a sub-premium feel. The upside of that though is that it's not too heavy considering its size, and while £1,000 is a hefty price tag for any piece of equipment, I actually think it's not terrible value given the ReefBot can test 5 or 6 different parameters at any one time, and I have no doubt that it would be heavier and more expensive if it was made more premium, so I suppose that's the trade-off. The light bar along the top looked really cool at first, but I find it far too bright, and it's lit up 100% of the time, so it never turns off. And because of that, you wouldn't want to keep this thing outside of a cabinet, and even inside of a cabinet, you might get a bit of light spill through the door gaps. To be fair, you can turn the light off with a switch under the lid, which is what I've done, but the light is actually a status light, and it tells you if the ReefBot is running a test, sitting dormant, or if there's a problem with it. So it's actually a really useful feature, and it would just be better if it was a lot more subtle, and I'd prefer either a single LED light or at least the option to have the light turn off after a set period of time. Away from the design and setting it up was actually pretty easy. You just have to connect the tubes at the rear, then add the reagents and connect it to the app. But because it doesn't use proprietary reagents, you have to buy your own separately. I bought test kits for calcium, alkalinity and magnesium, as well as nitrate and phosphate, and they cost me £80 for the full set. And you can actually choose from dozens of different test kits, and it will test all sorts of parameters above and beyond what I chose, but I think the big 5 are the most useful for most people, and that's where I think the ReefBot Lab has the potential to add the most value. However, while setup was pretty straightforward, I did have a couple of issues getting it started. Mine came with a US plug, so I needed to buy a US to UK adapter separately, and because I installed the 60mm vials the wrong way around, my ReefBot took a dump on my living room table when I ran the first test. So you need to make sure any 60mm vials sit front on like this and not sideways, which is actually a little bit annoying because when you have the 60mm vials installed the correct way, they touch the doors and make them bow outwards ever so slightly. The liquid leak also caused my ReefBot to malfunction temporarily because the limit switch got wet. Although to be fair, all I had to do to fix it was dry the limit switch out with a hairdryer. And yes, I do have a hairdryer actually. Well, Mrs. Reef Dog does. Now it's worked fine ever since, but it feels like an oversight to have an electrical part right on the bottom of the tray where it can get wet if there's a leak. And you can see I made the ReefBot wear a nappy for a few days while I made sure it was potty trained. Away from the setup and design then, how does it actually perform? Well, I ran the ReefBot for a few weeks before I started making this video, and I started by making it test all 5 parameters every day. And in doing so, I discovered 3 main things that I really don't like. First off, it's noisy. I'm not talking noisy like an old return pump that buzzes or an LED light with a whirring fan. It's so noisy that I don't want to be in the same room when it's testing, and in fact I don't even let it test overnight because I can still hear it upstairs. And I found myself only setting it to test when I'm at work away from the house. Now, accurately reproducing noise levels on YouTube is basically impossible, but for what it's worth, here's a clip of the sound it makes, recorded with an external microphone and with the audio normalised to match the rest of the video, and with a familiar sound at the start to calibrate your ears. Now I could maybe put up with a noise if the test lasted 10 minutes, but that brings me on to the second major issue I have with the ReefBot. The tests I run take between 45 minutes and an hour and a quarter each, and the time it takes further restricts when I can run tests. So I now have it set to test all 5 parameters 90 minutes apart, which means it starts testing at 9 AM and doesn't finish till almost 6 o'clock in the evening. And the third major issue goes back to the issue of space. Now I have 2 auto testers from Reef Factory, one that does alkalinity and one that does phosphate. They're not tiny by any means, but they are pretty compact, and crucially they only use about 60 millilitres of water per test. The ReefBot though is a very different story indeed. It actually uses very little tank water because the test kits it uses all require samples of less than 10 millilitres. But because it flushes everything with RODI water after every step, it creates an absolute ton of wastewater. I found each test produces around 300 to 400 millilitres of wastewater, and a full run of 5 tests produces almost 2 litres of water. Now if you can simply connect the wasteline to a drain somewhere in your house so you never have to empty it, then that's not a problem. But you can't return the wastewater to your tank, so most people will need a large container for the waste. And even this 5 litre container needs emptying after just 2 rounds of tests, which for me is far too much admin for a device that is supposed to make life easy for you. I also have a 10 litre RODI container here to feed it, which takes up even more space, and while I could just connect the ReefBot to my tank's RODI reservoir, that would mean my freshwater reservoir needs topping up more regularly, which again creates more admin. Now aside from those 3 big issues, there were also a few minor things I didn't like. The tester uses hypodermic needles, but doesn't come with a sharps bin out of the box, which means most people won't dispose of them safely, and the needles need replacing every 60 tests, so you'll need to keep a bunch of spare hypodermic needles in your house. I also couldn't find a local supply of replacement parts or spares in the UK, so you need to get everything direct from the Reef Kinetics website, which lists all prices in US dollars. It doesn't come with a guide on the pros and cons of which reagents you should use to test what, so you're left to work it out for yourself, and I also find the app quite unintuitive. I don't find it very easy to navigate, and nothing seems to be where I'd expect it to be, so you have to go menu diving quite often, which I find a bit frustrating. I also can't find anywhere in the app to log the expiry dates of the reagents, so I won't get a reminder when they go past their use by date, and worst of all, when the app shows the waste container is full, it just cancels all future tests. Now that is of course a good thing because it avoids spillage, but the app doesn't notify you that that's happened, so it just sits there waiting for you to work it out yourself. The only thing I would say on the app is that I've only been using it for a few weeks, so it's possible there might be fixes to the issues I was having. But the real point I'm making is that it's quite fiddly to use, and I don't want to spend my free time getting used to an app for a device that is supposed to make reefing easier for me. In terms of accuracy of test results, it's a little hard for me to say, and because of the other issues I found, I decided to focus on that in this review rather than the accuracy, which other people have already covered. And for what it's worth, I think the ReefBot should be able to produce very accurate results because of the unique way it works. Most automatic testers use dosing pumps to measure out the liquids, but the ReefBot uses an accurate stepper motor to fill and empty a syringe. So in theory it should be more capable of producing consistent measurements. And all of the other reviews I've seen report good accuracy of results, so while I can't give you a proper report of my own findings, I don't think accuracy will be an issue, and ultimately that's more or less the most important thing with an auto tester. So what are my overall thoughts then? Well, I personally don't think I'll be able to put up with the size, noisiness and the length of time it takes to complete tests, so if those are issues that would bother you, I'd just say to avoid it. But if you can work around those issues, there's real value in having a machine test all 5 of the major parameters every day or every week without fail all year round. And if you set it to test once a week or twice a week, the reagents will last for quite a long time, so it won't be expensive to run. So ultimately I do think there's a place for the ReefBot in the hobby, and I think it will suit some people, it's just not for me. Now if you've got any questions or if I've missed anything, let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video give me a thumbs up and subscribe for next time, and until then, happy reefing.